Pyongyang at night, people holding smartphones, electric cars on the road, newly built high-rise apartment blocks. Foreign visitors say the city looks nothing like it did just a few years ago. According to estimates by South Korea's central bank, the Bank of Korea, the BOK, North Korea's economy grew by 3.7% in 2024. That's the fastest pace in 8 years. The Wall Street Journal, the WSJ, called it the world's most unlikely growth story. And yet, over the same period, the price of rice in the markets more than quadrupled in 2 years, and the elevators in those new apartments stopped running. The strongest boom on record. So why is half the population still going hungry, and why are the lights going out? Stay with us to the end, and the real picture of North Korea comes into focus. First, we need to understand what that strongest growth really is. If you stack up the BOK's year-by-year estimates, North Korea's economy fell sharply from 2017 through 2022 under sanctions and the pandemic. The growth in 2023 and 2024 is the climb back out of that hole. Even in 2024, the economy is still smaller than it was at its 2016 peak. This isn't reaching new ground, it's returning to ground already lost. So what drove the rebound? According to the BOK, most of the growth came from 3 sectors: construction, heavy and chemical industry, and mining. Together, they account for roughly 88% of the total growth. The heavy chemical sector in particular surged by 10.7%, the fastest on record. A BOK official tied this to increased production of metal products used in weapons exported to Russia. Meanwhile, agriculture, the sector that feeds the people, actually shrank by 1.9%. The single biggest driver of growth was construction. In 2024, it expanded by 12.3%, mostly residential buildings in Pyongyang. But look at the column right next to it, and something strange appears. Over the same year, the electricity, gas, and water sector grew by just 0.9%. The buildings rise, but the power to run them barely grows at all. According to reporting, these two numbers aren't unrelated. To keep large-scale housing construction in Pyongyang running around the clock, power is reportedly being routed from across the country into the capital. The results show up in the data. According to the World Bank, only 57.5% of North Koreans had access to electricity in 2023. And even access can mean as little as 2 hours of power a day. Nearly half the population lives effectively outside the power grid. Even Pyongyang, which gets first claim on that power, falls short. On-the-ground outlets report that even in the city center, electricity flows only a few hours a day, and that high-rise elevators run only during limited windows. The power is spent building the apartments, and then the finished apartments have no power to light them. Can this growth run on its own? Mirror statistics, trade figures reconstructed from what North Korea's trading partners report, tell us something. North Korea's official trade is tied almost entirely to a single country, China. 99% of its imports come from China, and what comes in is processed hair for wigs, synthetic fabric, soybean oil, furniture, raw materials for contract processing, and consumer goods. Capital goods, the machinery and equipment that would build future productive capacity, barely appear in the official statistics. The problem is that this buy and consume trade runs a chronic deficit. North Korea's total exports are only about 1/6 of its imports. So what fills that enormous gap? The answer lies somewhere the ordinary trade statistics don't reach: in Russia. Several South Korean research institutes estimate the foreign currency North Korea earned by sending weapons and troops to Russia at anywhere from about $7.7 billion to more than $20 billion. The estimates differ by more than a factor of 2. That's how uncertain these numbers are. And much of that payment, reportedly, came not as cash, but as Russian weapons and military technology. Even the outside investment flowing in is concentrated in the capacity to make weapons. And here the deepest paradox appears. Over the same period, market rice prices exploded. Rice that cost around 5,000 won per kilogram 2 years ago reached, at one point in 2025, 30,000 won. Yet according to estimates from South Korea's Rural Development Administration, food output in 2024 barely fell, and rice production actually rose. This isn't a failed harvest. The cause was the currency. The North Korean won fell from around 8,000 to the dollar in mid-2024 to, at one point, more than 40,000. Losing roughly 4/5 of its value. Because the markets depend on imports, when the currency collapsed, grain prices followed it up. And here's the irony. One of the forces driving that currency collapse was the very expansion of trade. The more trade grew, the more demand there was for foreign currency, and as state wage increases piled on, the won fell further. Part of the growth itself made the people's groceries more expensive. Now back to our opening question, the strongest boom on record. So why did life get harder for the people? The answer lies in the kind of growth. This was not growth that builds a future. First, even with this fastest growth in 8 years, North Korea's economy in 2024 is still about 5% below its 2016 level. It isn't a record high. It has yet to recover a peak from 8 years ago. Second, even that growth is tilted toward weapons and concrete. Third, it's tethered to an outside fuel called Russia. Fourth, the very expansion of that growth collapsed the currency and made the dinner table more expensive. Gross domestic product, GDP, measures only what is produced. The apartments rising in Pyongyang and the shells sent to Russia are caught by that measure. But the darkened lights, the stopped elevators, the quadrupled price of rice, those are not. Of course, North Korea is a closed economy that releases no data. Nearly all of these numbers are outside estimates, and they should be taken not as a law, but as an observed pattern. Yet even those uncertain numbers point in one direction. The light of this growth gathered on the new buildings of a single city, and its shadow fell across the whole country.